It's Magnus Carlsen versus Jan Christoph Duda, a heavyweight clash. We're diving into a Sicilian defense, so get ready for a sharp tactical battle right from the start. The game kicks off with standard Sicilian theory, pawn to e4, met by c5. Both sides develop their knights and fianchetto the bishop. Classic solid play from both grandmasters, and here comes the action. White pushes the pawn to d4, cracking open the center, and black immediately recaptures, setting the stage for the first real fight. Magnus recaptures with the knight on d4. An excellent move, and in fact, the only move that keeps a real advantage here. Any other recapture would let black equalize on the spot. The position settles, black challenges in the center, white's knight retreats, and both players get their kings to safety, castling kingside and connecting the rooks. A typical middle game is upon us. The maneuvering phase begins. White prepares for queenside expansion with b3 and fianchettos the bishop, while Duda develops his own pieces, getting ready to counter on the same side. Duda plays his bishop out to b7, but this is a slight inaccuracy. Moving the knight to e7 was a more solid choice. This allows Magnus to seize the initiative with a powerful knight jump, and there it is, knight to d5, a brilliant sacrifice from Magnus Carlsen. Here's the point. If the knight moves to b8, white takes the knight on f6 with check. The queen recaptures, and the pawn pushes to c4, shattering black's structure and seizing control. Duda has no choice but to accept the sacrifice, taking the knight on d5. Carlsen recaptures with the pawn, and black tucks the knight away to e7, trying to regroup. Magnus immediately applies queenside pressure, pushing his pawns up to c4 and a5. Black trades pawns and brings the knight over to g6, looking for counterplay. And now, the tactics explode. Black strikes in the center with e4, leading to a flurry of trades and piece activity as both sides fight for control of key squares. White continues the sequence with the bishop taking the knight on d3, and the pawn recaptures on d3. A fantastic find from Duda, and absolutely the only move. Anything else loses on the spot, and here's why. The rooks would come off on e8, the queen would recapture, white's queen would slide to b2, and after queen to a4, black is simply losing a piece. With the tactical storm over for now, white's rook slides to d1. The knight jumps into f5, asking new questions of black's defense, forcing the bishop to drop back to c8. Knight to e3, another brilliant move from Magnus, sacrificing a second piece. The idea is to win material after a forcing sequence. If the f-pawn pushes forward, the rook swings to a1, the queen has to move to d7, and white's queen simply takes the pawn on d3, a clean pawn up. Black captures the knight on e3, white activates the a-rook, and now Duda's queen gets active, first hitting b3 and then snapping up the pawn on c4. Magnus recaptures with the queen on e3, a fantastic move and the only path to a winning advantage. Watch this incredible follow-up. If black grabs the pawn on d5, the rook takes the pawn on d3, the queen is forced to f5, and the rook slides to d1, and that wins a full rook for white. But Duda plays bishop to f5, an inaccuracy that lets the win slip into Magnus's hands. The best defense was to take the pawn on d5, but now white can force a decisive rook trade, and Magnus converts with precision. The rook moves to c1, forcing a trade on c7. After a check, the king steps aside, and white's queen centralizes on d4, preparing the final attack. The rook slides over to a7, a patient but deadly move. The plan is simple: invade on the back rank and end the game. And here, under pressure, Duda misses the looming threat. He needed to find a very specific defense to hold on. The best try was queen to e8. Then, after bishop to c3, the queen returns to c8, bishop to d2, and bishop to g6, holding everything together. But in the game, he plays bishop to g6 immediately, and this allows a decisive invasion. And Magnus doesn't hesitate. The rook crashes down onto a8, creating overwhelming threats against the black king. The pressure is just too much, and Duda slips again. There was one last difficult path to survival. The only chance was bishop to h5. After rook to d8, pawn to f6, rook back to a8, and bishop to e2, black is still fighting. Instead of that, he plays queen to d7, and this allows white to win a pawn with force. A rare slip from Carlsen. He's still completely winning, but he misses the most direct path to victory. The most clinical move was bishop to c3. After pawn to f6, the rook takes the pawn on a6, queen to e8, and the rook swings to b6, securing a winning advantage. Back in the game, though, Magnus plays queen to b6. Still a crushing position, but not quite as precise. And that is the final decisive mistake. Duda had one last chance to defend a very difficult position. He had to play bishop to e4. Then, after queen to d4, queen to e7, pawn to f3, the bishop takes on f3, and black is still in the game. But in the game, Duda plays queen to f5, and this walks right into a winning combination for white. The punishment is immediate. The rook takes the bishop on f8 with check, starting the final attack. King to h7 is the only legal move, a great find under duress that forces white to be precise. The winning idea for white now is queen takes the pawn on d6, queen to g5, queen to b8, and after bishop to e4, white's attack is overwhelming. Magnus plays queen to d4. It's a slight inaccuracy, as taking on d6 was even stronger, but it doesn't matter. The position is completely, utterly winning for white. And in this position, Jan-Christoph Duda resigns. White is up a clean piece with a crushing attack. Magnus Carlsen takes the win. The threat was bishop to h5, then bishop to c3, pawn to f6, bishop to d2, and bishop to e2, and black's position completely collapses.